don't touch each other, please. They go right down deep, and they have collided. So both the BWT cars collide.
So internecine squabble between the two Williams. Looked to me like Rosberg tapped the back of Webber. That is absolutely the last thing any Formula One team wants to see.
It's a Lacey and Heidfeld. I don't know what's happened, but it's the big poor Alain Prost, as if he hadn't got enough pressure on him.
Oh, we've lost a wheel. It's a racing engineering car that's ripped his left wheel off. Furious at his teammate. That will be a very fun team briefing.
Namely, we're going to talk about Rubens, Barrichello and Jenson Button in the part of the career where they were officially equals. Emphasis on the word officially. And we're going to take a look at the time of Barrichello after Ferrari, how he handled himself at Honda, how the fight with Button went, and we're going to ruthlessly go over what happened, what should have happened, and what could have happened.
No, that is not nearly emotional enough, Lennart. Anyone who's listened to our opinions in the past, either on these podcasts or on our Discord when we chat, Lennart is a big fan of Rubens Barrichello. You believe, in your opinion, that Barrichello maintained a very, very good race pace all the way to the end of his career, and that he stayed as a very strong driver all the way to the beginning of the 2010s. And you even went so far in our 2012 podcast to say that had Barrichello been in that 2012 Williams, then he would have had a fantastic season and probably finished something like 6th or 7th in the standings.
Indeed.
Now, I am quite a big fan of Jenson Button. I think Button, especially from his mid to late 2000s era to, I would say, the early 2010s, was one of the finest drivers on the field. And conversely, you are quite dismissive of Button, especially during his World Championship year. And I thought it would be really interesting if we talked about this, because the thing about Button, for example, is he drove at so many midfield teams and so many kind of their teams. And while Barrichello is so famous for his era at Jordan and his era at Ferrari, and maybe even his era at Stewart, he's kind of forgotten, especially something like 2006, 2007, that he had this middle period between Ferrari and Brawn where he drove at Honda. And Barrichello and Button were teammates at Brawn, but they were teammates the previous 3 years. And it's those 4 consecutive years that I guess we're going to focus on today. And is the general, consensus wrong? How we see it? Because I would say, what would you say the general consensus is between Button and Barrichello?
Well, as far as I'm aware within the F1 community, it's simply perceived that Button was the better driver for most of the years except 2008, emphasized by the podium at Silverstone, which we will get into. And so it's simply seen as, for lack of a better word, the continuation of the Actors Barrichello as the number 2 driver. So we will have to go over those years and see whether it is true, whether Barrichello merely changed one superior driver, superior teammate to another, or whether there was something more to it, which is obviously what I believe, given the established emotional attachments we have for the drivers in the discussion. So, yeah, let's get into it, and we'll start with the year of the last Italian World Cup, namely 2006.
Sure. 2006 was interesting. Honda took over BAR and they had a lot of promise. When I say they had a lot of promise, I mean they made a lot of promises. They effectively said that they were going to be, if not championship contenders, then outside championship contenders. They taught themselves very big, and towards the beginning they had a lot of pace, especially from Button. From my memory, Barrichello was a little slow to get out the gate. Button had a podium at Malaysia, and he even had a pole position at Australia, famously crashing out because his engine blew up only a few meters away from the line. 2006 is kind of defined by Button's win at Hungary, but it's also defined by, I would say, a lot of over-promising and under-delivering. because Button got pole early on in the season, but it was also because he was on a ridiculously low fuel load. And for most of the season, Honda really just weren't really anywhere. By the time they actually got themselves into gear, they were fighting for fourth and fifth, which is a decent pace, but compared to what was promised for the whole season,
it just wasn't there. Yeah. The thing is, obviously, Honda in a way cut their own flesh on that one. Even if they had said, okay, we are going to long term be the real deal, everyone would have loved the 2006 season. You have to remember, while they were second as BIR in the Constructors' Championship, 2004 was a pretty weird year where the actual top teams just weren't delivering, outside of obviously Ferrari. Therefore, I don't think the second in the World Constructors' Championship of BIRs really saw that that big a deal. And personally, I don't see it as that big a deal, as close as being a vice champion can be to not being a big deal. And then in 2005, they had the obvious they had a heavy downfall. They were pretty much nowhere. Takuma Sato had like 1 point all season. And so if they had simply said, okay, we're building something great here, and would have done the rise of the ranks, everyone would have loved it. Regarding the driver performance, well, Barrichello had the thing that many new drivers had, especially you could see it last year with Ricciardo and Vettel, where a new driver at a new team, especially after a very long stint at his previous team, just isn't quite adapted to the situation, isn't quite there yet, isn't quite capable of making the most of what he has. And so it's not very controversial, not even for me as a Barrichello fan, to say Button had him in 2006. Though it should be noted that there was a period in the middle of the season, pretty much from Monaco around to Hungary, where it was actually just Barrichello basically carrying the scoring, what little scoring load there was, including a great fourth place finish at the infamous 2006 Monaco Grand Prix chaotic event that was. And so Button was the better driver. Barrichello needed to was there but hadn't adapted yet to how things were done at that team. So yeah, that's how it is.
Yeah, it's also a bit of foreshadowing when you say that Barrichello was doing a lot better when the car seemed to be in the doldrums. Yeah, I mean, to take a couple of the points that you made, random fact is that as far as I know, the 2004 BAR is the only team to ever come second in the Constructors' Championship and not win a race. They never won a single race that year. And also in 2005, obviously, they had the horrific DSQ, where they were underweighing their cars by quite a significant amount using fuel as ballast. And yeah, it kind of put BAR into a very fallow period for that reason. Yeah, I mean, so 2006, I would say the verdict on Barrichello, I think the reason why he was so harshly judged was because he was so experienced. I mean, this is a driver who was going into his 14th season in Formula One. So for him to take so long to get up to speed, because there was a lot of poor qualifying performances, that kind of thing. So I think there was not so much sympathy for him, I think, is the problem. I think he on one hand, he was in a new team and he was trying something new and he had to adapt to that. But on the other hand, he was in his early to mid 30s. He should be able to, jump into a new car at this point and do quite well. So yeah. I think it's sort of a sympathy question.
Yeah, on that note, if you allow me to quickly add something, Barrichello himself didn't do himself any favors in the years before that, because he more or less, whenever given the chance, implied that he would be so much better if Ferrari weren't holding him back. And yeah, when that take becomes exposed as, well, not a good one, a frozen cold one, then yeah, you're just not going to get much sympathy for your plight. It's sort of like if Vettel had spent all of 2020 saying, I'm not that worse than Leclerc, I'm just being held back by this trash team, which incidentally wouldn't have been a lie, but I digress. But the thing is, and then he would have struggled at Aston Martin, I think people would have been also just as much on him for that. So I think you are right. It's part of experience and part simply Barrichello not doing himself any favors in terms of talking. He had an unfortunate tendency during his early 2000s to occasionally put his foot in the mouth and create a bit of a repetition as a whiner. Even I, as a fan, can fully admit that.
Yeah, 2006 I think is mostly defined by Button's events, namely the Australian Grand Prix, where his car blew up heartbreakingly at the line. I think he was in like 4th or 5th. He wasn't winning, but he was still very high up. And also with Button's crazy win in Hungary after it was pouring with rain the entire time, which was kind of a, again, foreshadowing masterful in wet conditions kind of situation.
Underrated part is also his podium at the Brazilian Grand Prix, where he basically took the fight to 2 times world champion Fernando Alonso, basically our race. So yeah, that was another one. As I said, this is not the heated debate we have promised yet, but this season I'm going to fully give to Button. That is his point on the scoreboard.
All right, well, let's move on to 2007. And 2007 is the year I would probably say I have the least amount of opinion on. I think this is less about the drivers and more about the car itself. So,
Earth nightmares.
I must say, please give us the context for our young viewers and listeners. What went on in 2007 with the Honda team?
Yeah, the thing is, there were a lot of changes behind the scenes in at the Honda Formula One team in 2006. The Japanese corporate structure wanted more influence on the team, added Mr. Nakamoto. Believe it or not, I don't actually recall his given name. And as it turns out, he was not very good at heading a Formula One team. And as part of their image campaign, it was the beginning of the trend where auto manufacturers acted as if they cared much about the environment, despite producing the one thing that arguably is in the top 10 of hurting the environment. And to convey just how much they love our planet, and to distract from the fact that their main sponsor left them because of tobacco bans, they painted their car, the AR107, in the colors of our beautiful blue planet. And I won't lie, it is, to this day, I maintain one of the one of the cooler concepts for a thematic livery, as much as this may be controversial on some level. But the main problem with the 2007 Honda was that because of the problems I mentioned, it was not good.
That's a very in-depth analysis. Yeah, it was called the Earth car. They came into the season with this whole thing, and they didn't have any sponsors on the car, if I'm not mistaken. They removed all their sponsors, removed it with a giant picture of Earth, and then made it all nice and dark blue and bits of green. And the main problem with the car was it wasn't very good, as Lennart very technically explained. It was very slow. In terms of on-track action, the only thing I remember is both of their Honda engines blowing up. You had a situation whereby Super Aguri, which were the B team to Honda, were actually ahead of them in the standings for a significant amount of the season. Almost all of Honda's famous moments were actually from Super Aguri, when you had Takuma Sato famously overtaking Fernando Alonso at Canada. But when it came to the Honda parent team, you had explosions from the engine. I remember when the 2007 race began at Canada, you had, I don't think Button's car even started. I think the race began and his car stayed on the grid, and he just left. He just went home. That was the kind of season it was. So Barrichello was in his only pointless season that year. That's the only season Barrichello never scored points, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And Button did score a couple of points and seemed to be the one who did get those results, but how much of that is down to just pure luck and how much of that is down to a clear, differentiation in pace. I'm not going to give that one to Button, if that makes sense, because it was, in our predecessors, Ginoc gave Honda itself Reject of the Year, and I would say that's a far bigger factor in why they were slow and why Rubens Barrichello was pointless.
Agreed.
As opposed to the drivers.
Yeah, the thing is actually, in terms of pure race finishes, Barrichello actually finished ahead of Button more often than he did not. But the thing is, well, to put it simply, Button was there when it counted. He made the most of chaos to sneak in a point, sneak in 2 points, sneak in that amazing finish at China, where he was 5th, just behind Sebastian Vettel in his second breakout party, the one that actually got rewards. And
yeah, I don't speak of the other one.
As you said, when the car's rubbish, you only have that much to go on in terms of comparing the drivers. As I pointed out that Barrichello had the better finishes, but it doesn't really matter. I'm a fan of Barrichello, and I openly admit I don't think there was anything in 2007 that he did that was really worth celebrating.
Okay.
Simply because he had nothing to make fireworks with. It's like complaining about a firework artist not giving you a firework when he doesn't have the explosive materials. So that season was basically the equivalent of one of those disappointing sandwiches you occasionally get at the
I was interested with that analogy.
Petrol stations, where basically nothing is on there. So I guess technically I'm going to give that season to Barrichello, to Button as well, simply because, he got the points.
I was interested in knowing where that analogy was going to go. Sandwich, interesting choice of imagery.
Yeah, you see, you know those petrol station sandwiches that have nothing on them. Like you're lucky you get a butter and a slice of cheese.
Indeed. Moving swiftly on to 2008. This is where it gets really interesting, I think, because this is probably the first season where it was quite clearly in Barrichello's favour. 2008 was a bit of a topsy-turvy season. So Ross Brawn was on a sabbatical after Schumacher retired. Ross Brawn also went on a sabbatical. He left as technical director of Ferrari. And in 2008, he took over as the team principal of Honda. I think the most famous thing about Honda that year was the fact that they were probably the forerunners of the shark fin design features. They would stick lots of extra fins on the side of their car to make it go faster. It didn't help because the car was still really slow, but they tried.
And I loved the visuals. I openly admit that. I don't care. Stone me, feather me, do whatever you want. Those winglets were freaking cool.
Thank you. You're back to obeying the watershed. Yeah, they're very pretty cars. I agree with you. I think we're both in agreement that those 2007, 2008 cars are particularly very, very, very beautiful cars.
Very futuristic, really. So that is what I personally. It's obviously part because of a return to the sport in 2007, 2008. But to me, that is what the ideal of. It's the concept of Formula One as a peak of racing technology. That is what those cars, I think, represented more than any other cars in any era, really.
No, I agree. It was definitely the future is now kind of thing. When it came to on-track action, the most famous race, I would say, you can correct me on this, I would say it was probably Silverstone when it came to Honda's performance, because that was a famous race where Kovalainen was on pole. Remember Kovalainen? Massa famously span around 17 times, and it was just pouring with rain, and Hamilton dominated. And but the most the crazy thing was that somehow Rubens Barrichello took that 2008 Honda and put it on a podium at Silverstone in the rain, and that was just a fantastic showcase of his ability. Damn, it was a fantastic drive. It's probably the strongest drive of that 2007-2008 era of Honda. Mm-hmm. Barrichello absolutely flipped the table. It was Barrichello who took every opportunity that came to him in a season which was very topsy-turvy. 2008 was also a season where the regulations they'd been around for so long that many backmarker teams were catching up, and Honda was one of those teams which took advantage of a lot of crazy races. And it was almost always Barrichello who did that. If I'm not mistaken, I think Button scored points once, whereas Barrichello scored points many more times. Button was dreadful in qualifying. Admittedly, their engine did continue to blow up quite regularly. But you had a situation, I remember, it was in Bahrain, Button crashed into Coulthard when they were fighting for like P20, and I remember he was the only retirement in France. He crashed into Bourdais, so it's like not only was the car slow and kept blowing up, but Button also kept just driving into other cars, and it was just like, it was possibly Button's worst season. There are a couple of contenders for that, which doesn't sound very good for Jenson Button, but he had a couple of very bad seasons in the 2000s. And
well, the statistical fun fact is that he's the only world champion to have ever been Reject of the Year, and he did it twice. So.
Yeah. For the record, it was 2001 was the other year, when he was at Benetton,
Exactly.
the Playboy years. So yeah, I mean, this one is quite clearly Barrichello's turf. I've been rambling, please.
No, I mean, even if I felt the need to interrupt you, which I didn't, I probably wouldn't have wanted to, because obviously that 2008 Silverstone reminiscence is a very pleasant memory for me as a fan. But the thing is, statistically, it's actually, in a way, a reversal of 2007, because in the races where both finished, Button actually finished ahead of Barrichello more often than he did not. But again, Barrichello did it when it counted. And that is, in many ways, the most fascinating thing in researching 2007, 2008 for this was simply this basically ironic reversal of the whole thing. Whereas Button was the one who wasn't getting the better of Rubens in 2007, he was the one who was there when it counted, and vice versa. This year was 2008 was the one where Barrichello was the one who got all the great results, that beautiful third place, the other good finishes, that one in Australia where he unfortunately got disqualified for crossing the red light, the Canada one, I think. That is Barrichello, was the one who got the points, was the one who got beaten by his teammate in terms of actual race finishes. And the season before that, it was Button. So that's the most fascinating thing. And as you said, this one is going, for me, Barrichello's way. And therefore leads my scoreboard at 1-2. But yeah, I mean, it's not quite as the 2007 season was. But again, it's basically just not that good a car. And then it was just about being there when it counted, and that year it was Barrichello who did that.
My score is currently 1-1. I think 2007 we can call it a draw probably, and then put 2008. I would put Barrichello ahead, and 2006 Button ahead, which makes 2009 the year that counts. So for those of you who have been living under a rock, Honda pulled out of Formula One at the end of 2008 due to the recession. Sold the team to Ross Brawn for £1. Ross Brawn stuck some Mercedes engines in there and proceeded to win the championship. The Brawn team won in 2009. It was like one of the most crazy turnarounds, one of the most amazing stories in Formula One history. To do that, they had Jenson Button and Rubens Barrichello again for one last waltz. They nearly got Bruno Senna, actually, as a funny side note. I mentioned it in my driver profile for Bruno Senna. He was basically the number one favourite to take Barrichello's place, but given the situation whereby they had a brand new team with Brawn decided to keep Barrichello because, he knew the car, he knew the team, and he was, he had a good race pace all the way up to the end of his career. So
his wisest choice.
Yes, it was a wise choice to keep Barrichello. Jenson Button won the championship. If I may, I will say the best moments and the worst moments. So Button was winning from the get-go. His best part of the season was the beginning. I think he won 6 of the first 7 races. The race he didn't win, he came third, like a solid third behind the 2 Red Bulls. It wasn't just that he was winning from pole, leading every lap. He just seemed to be on this zone. I was thinking when I was preparing for this podcast, I was thinking certain drivers, even when they lead, there's always that certain fragility of their psychology that sometimes a driver, even when they're winning, even when they have no excuse to crash, they'll make a mistake, or you don't trust them, if you know what I mean. And Button didn't have that. He was very humble out of the cockpit. You can disagree with me on that part, but he was also he was very somber in the cockpit. He didn't ever all season go crazy. He didn't do any flamboyant driving. He took the car to the front, kept it there, was consistent, and that was exactly what Brawn needed from him. I'm thinking his best drives were probably Turkey is the famous one, whereby he had a heavier fuel load than Sebastian Vettel. Vettel took pole, got ahead of Button, and then made a mistake on the first lap. And Button overtook him and then held up Vettel, who had much less fuel in, and basically dominated the race as a result. And it was that kind of consistency and that ability to keep the car on the road, do nothing fancy, but just win solidly and sensibly. That's the reason why he won the championship. He took so many points at the beginning of the season that when it came to the second half, the final 10 races, when the Brawn car was no longer all dominating, that he already had such a lead that he didn't need to push it to the nth degree to win a race to get ahead in the championship. He was already there. But that's not what we're going to talk about, I don't think. I think the thing we're going to talk about is Rubens Barrichello, his teammate, because he had probably maybe the most interesting season of his career.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Though, well, to take my point first and foremost away, because I don't like... because I don't want to twiddle around with it much. As far as I'm concerned, the tagline of the 2009 season for Barrichello is talent does not outdo team mistakes. And the reality is there were a metric ton of them. By my count, what Brawn GP lost for Barrichello is close to 20 points, which back in the day was a lot. 2 race wins. All in all. And that is the thing where I tend to face the most disagreement on, because, yeah, for some reason, people tend to think that everything... Well, I won't say everything was on the level, because it was. Let's just remember Occam's razor on this one. But that it's not like the Brawn... that Barrichello's side of Brawn didn't make major mistakes that, again, cost him a whole lot of points. There were the clutch issues that plagued his entire season, and I'm going to get straight to the point on this one. If a driver does 269 starts before the season and never earns a reputation as a bad starter, like, say, Mark Webber has, then no, I am never going to assume that it was a lack of driver skill that caused these errors. So these things alone cost Barrichello probably... how far could it go on Belgium, really? A single podium would have been realistic. And then the issue in Turkey, which again probably would be worth another 5 points. So those 2 things alone made up 10. Australia, I don't want to give...
Yeah,
I don't want to give him
a funny one. Yeah, because he did kind of take that second place by default, because Vettel and Kubica took each other out.
So that's the question: do we believe whether he could have won that one had he had a proper start and could have probably challenged it? We will never know. I personally obviously believe it, but I'm not going to.
Of course you do.
And that is not the hill I'm going to die on with the 2009 season, because there's so much more. But I do want to play the ball back to you first before I get into more of the stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you use the Turkey example, because I would think that's probably the weakest example to support Barrichello on, because Barrichello, he did have a problem at the start, but he also, his retirement was probably, not officially, but probably also related to the fact that he hit 2 other cars before he retired. Like, whereas Button was having probably the dominant drive of the season, or at least of his season. Barrichello got frustrated, and I think that sort of plays into the overall thing that we're going to get into, which is Barrichello's frustration. He had obviously, as you said earlier, when he was at Ferrari, he liked to complain a lot. He kind of had a reputation as a bit of a whiner, and when it came to 2009, he it was like the ghost of Ferrari kind of came back to him, and it was also compounded, of course, by the fact that Ross Brawn was the team principal, both of those eras. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Barrichello did have Anti-stall issues specifically, those were the main ones. But he also did make some mistakes himself. I'm thinking Singapore qualifying, he had a massive crash into the wall, which smashed the chassis so badly that they basically had to tell both drivers that you cannot afford to have any kind of major crash because we don't have a spare chassis anymore. That's like the shoestring budget that Braun were on at the time, and so for that reason I give the technical problems leeway. But then again, like, as someone who will defend Button and say that Button had like the season of his career, I would dare also say that I can excuse Braun. It's lucky for Button that he didn't have as many issues, but he also, conversely, Button didn't get frustrated and he didn't crash into people when he was fighting for 7th and 8th. He was able to every race pick up a couple of points, which I think was the difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, interesting that you think of Turkey as his best drive, whereas I personally would have given Button's best drive to Monaco.
Yeah, I would say Monaco would be the other one.
Yeah, the thing is, because that is the one where even if I switch to ultimate 100% contrarian, no, I'm not giving him the dirt under my fingernails. I could not argue anything against it. Button was so much faster than Barrichello on that specific day. It's ridiculous. The timing chart of that one, well, I can't say it's burned into my memory because that would be a ridiculous overstatement, but let's just say I remember it, and it was a very emphatic one, which obviously didn't help Barrichello's reputation as a complainer a lot, since it came after another race where really it was a problem of strategy. The 2009 Spanish Grand Prix. The question throughout the entire weekend was 2-stop or 3-stop. It pretty much became very clear that 2-stop was the superior one. Button's race engineer realized that, changed the strategy. Barrichello's did not. And when a driver has a better strategy, he's going to win even if he's slightly slow. And therefore, yeah, that is just another another 2 points added on to the pile. And on the topic of strategy, we obviously have the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring, where somehow Braun managed to have a strategy so bad that Mark Webber could take a drive-through penalty and still be ahead of him. And not because he was so far up ahead the road, but simply because the pit stop was so poorly timed that, yeah. And that Nürburgring weekend was the source of the, at the time, very infamous blah, blah, blah rant, which I don't think many people actually remember now.
Yeah, I mean, it was a meme that was in the very, very early days of what would now be called memes. But yeah, Barrichello after the race in Germany said that there's been a lot of blah, 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 blahing, and I don't want to hear that. He was very frustrated with the team. He felt that the team was kind of the reason why he wasn't doing so well, as you were also arguing right now as well. I can't argue against you on the specifics of the races. I've got nothing against that. You've obviously, this is your raison d'etre, this is your reason for bringing this up, and I mean
my spite-driven grudge, let's call it what it is.
I will be kind to you and say that this is your passion project. But no, I understand why you say these things and why this is your raison d'etre. But it's, I think the main thing that goes for Button is his ability to keep it on the track and keep his head cool. Because if you take, for example, Sebastian Vettel, who was very young, he made lots of mistakes, even though he arguably had a better car for a longer period of time than Button did. Whereas Vettel made lots of mistakes, and it was quite clear that he wasn't championship material in 2009. It was quite clear he was getting there, but in 2009 he wasn't championship material. And it was that consistency of ability that Button showed in 2009, I think, which I've heard people say that Button didn't deserve that championship, as if people deserve or don't deserve championships. Yeah. But I've heard people say stuff like that, and I think it's kind of bollocks, to be honest, because who deserved it more than he did? Because I wouldn't say, even if Barrichello had not taken those issues, I don't think Barrichello would have, in that context, deserved it more by any sort of metric outside of the possibility of reliability. And I don't think reliability is the only metric by which you can judge those two guys' seasons. I mean, if you take Barrichello's race at Monza, for example, it was amazing. It was quite clear that like he just dominated, and he quite clearly had the match of Button. But likewise, as you say, in Monaco, Button had the match of Barrichello. I think that Button deserved to win that championship, and I think it was. You're probably right that in context, had they had equal reliability, they probably would have been much closer. But that's the way the cookie crumbles, and that's the way things go. And do I think that Barrichello would have won the championship? I'm not sure I could say yes, like to that, convinced in saying it. I'm not sure I could convincingly say yes, Barrichello would have won the championship if the roles were reversed, or if at the very least they had equal reliability. And I think that will be my conclusion on that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there are a number of things that point towards that conclusion for me. For one, it's the simple fact that Barrichello out-qualified Button over the entire season. That is one thing. Another thing is when the going got tough at Brawn, simply because their competitive wasn't quite there. I mean, after Turkey, the only driver who won races for Brawn was Barrichello. And neither of them... In fact, in Valencia, Button wasn't even in the same league. He just didn't exist at the same level as Barrichello did.
I am going to refute this, but please carry on.
See, the thing is, and of course, as you mentioned at Monza, he was simply the bit faster car. Probably, I think Button was third before Hamilton crashed out on was it the second to last lap, or was it outright the last lap? But yeah, the thing is, and these are simply the things that I think give the whole thing, that to me personally let me believe that Barrichello was a better driver that year, and had things not gone against him in the early part where the Brawn really was at that peak, he probably would have scored enough points to... It wouldn't have been a dominant win. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, he would have won by 1 million points. That's ridiculous. But I think he would have been just on top enough to, well, roll to the title. Yeah.
I mean, in reality, I mean, he took it to the second last race, so it's hardly like he was dominated.
Yeah.
But I do want to address this myth where this fake narrative has come up, which is that Button was dominated when the car was bad. That Button was outclassed completely by Rubens the moment that they took to Silverstone and beyond.
So for the interest of fairness, I want to stress that I said that only specifically about Valencia. So
yeah, I understand that, but there is a narrative on this, and I think it's totally false. I think that idea is wrong. I think people saw Britain, and people liked to throw conclusions in the air based on one race, and they saw, look, Barrichello outperformed Button once, therefore, and it's like, well, actually, no, I think it's just a testament to the fact that they were very closely matched. It's a testament to the fact that Jenson Button wasn't of the tier of Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, Schumacher, drivers who completely dominated their teammates. I don't think Button ever really dominated any teammates in the later half of his career. He was surrounded by quite good teammates, I'll admit.
That's the thing, yeah. He was facing the legends of the sport, to be blunt about it.
So, well, maybe that's a poor argument to use in that case, but it is a myth that he was outclassed by Barrichello when the car was worse. The final 10 races of the season, they were 50-50 in terms of race finishes. It just so happens to be that those were the lesser points finishes. And as I kept saying, like, Button didn't throw it into the wall. He didn't overdrive the car. He didn't smash it up in qualifying. He took it to a very boring 6th place almost every race, and that was all he needed to do. Whether you think that's pathetic because who cares about a driver who finishes 6th, or if you think that's a smart thing to do, is up to you. But that's what he did, and I think there is a little bit of merit in that.
I mean, I can't sit here and say what I feel about Alain Prost being one of the greatest drivers of all time if I didn't have a certain level of appreciation for someone who just gets the points he needs. So there's nothing wrong with crawling to the line is a bit overdramatic, but you get the picture. Therefore, and if the roles had been reversed, if Barrichello had been the one who got all the wins at the start of the year and then would have been slightly beaten by Button in the second half of the year, you can bet your everything I would be making this very same argument that you are doing right now. So the thing is, I obviously believe that had those things not happened, Barrichello would have been the 2009 Formula One world champion. But the thing is, I think I care more about it than Barrichello probably himself does. Let's be real about it. This is this view of mine, this obsessive arguing, this rationalization of things that didn't go his way. It's a fool's crusade. The reality of the sport is the results are as they stand. Jenson Button is the 2009 Formula One world champion. Jenson Button will forever be seen as the world champion, which, again, since he won the title, he should. You were right on the point that there's no such thing as deserving a world title, and yeah, it's simply something that I should let go, but being the sports fan that I am, just can't let go.
Well, it's understandable.
It's one of those things that makes sports the emotional thing it is, the last bastion of irrationality in a supposedly rational world. But yeah, the thing is, as I said, Barrichello probably doesn't care about it nowhere as much as I do. And to be fair, he shouldn't. Even beyond this, not having the 2009 title, never being the Formula One world champion, he has achieved a great lot of things after Brawn. Brawn wasn't the end of the story, not even remotely. I'm going to go in a bit of it's not quite a history lesson, but obviously after the season ended, Brawn became Mercedes. Mercedes wanted the all-German lineup. They first went with Rosberg and Heidfeld, but then obviously they managed to lure Schumacher out of retirement and got all but one podium out of it. You may enter some sarcastic applause at your own discretion.
Dear. No comment.
Yeah. Barrichello himself went to Williams, Button went to McLaren. And, well, Barrichello and Patrick had never got on the same wavelength. It was the late years of Head. It was, to say, in a way, the late years of Sir Frank, and it was clear that they, in a way, had lost their magic touch. Williams was a midfield team, and Barrichello had a great year, all in all, in 2010. He had the infamous overtake at Hungary against Michael. He had the 4th place at Valencia. He was the one who made the call to switch to intermediate that gave Nico Hülkenberg his first and, as it would turn out, only pole position. And when at the end of the year Williams needed a pay driver, they brought in Pastor Maldonado. It was, to me, not a question that it was the only sensible choice to let Hülkenberg go. Because, if you will remember, Barrichello outqualified Hülkenberg, Barrichello outperformed Hülkenberg on every level. Yeah, and then came his final season in 2011. And that Williams was rubbish.
Yeah, I don't think there's much argument against that.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine what Bruno Senna could have done in that Williams.
Yeah, well, in fact, the thing is, Maldonado would have probably outscored Barrichello in his final Formula One season, if not for Lewis Hamilton's very silly defense late at Monaco.
Yeah, Monaco. Trust me, that's a hill I'll die on.
Yeah.
Maldonado's being taken out. I think he was in at least 7th, if not 6th place when he got taken out by
I think it was 7th, but don't don't fact check that too precisely, because it's probably going to be wrong. I think Barrichello, because of that, inherited 9th place, so it must have been 7. But anyway, the thing is, Barrichello technically ended up with more points, outqualified him by the slightest of margin. I think it was 10-19. But again, I don't have the precise numbers. And it didn't matter anyway. That Williams, it was basically the same as 2007 and 2008 at Honda, where why bother? Why bother thinking about who was better?
Yeah.
And well, that was pretty much the end of his Formula 1 career. As you know, Williams decided to go with Bruno Senna's sponsorship money after first flirting with comeback for Kimi Räikkönen. That's interestingly a story and a half. I wonder what it is. Truly an interesting idea what would have happened with Williams, with Kimi had he come back for Williams.
Rubens Barrichello moving to Lotus 2012.
Could have been an option. Well, anyway, after that, he went on to have a year in IndyCar, where he had the same problem as a lot of Formula 1 drivers, or just generally drivers from all series who come to IndyCar, is simply new car, new environment, new tracks. And he started the year off not that great, but it should be noted that he led laps at the Indianapolis 500 and was the Indianapolis 500 Rookie of the Year, in a very ironic use of the word rookie.
Ripe old age of 40.
Yeah. And by the end of the year, he got a couple of top 5 finishes, so it was clear that he had potential in IndyCar. But the thing is, he was with KB Racing basically through connections to Tony Kanaan. Here's a fun fact: at the 2006 Monaco Grand Prix and at the Indianapolis 500 of that year, Kanaan and Barrichello shared or exchanged their helmet designs, which is a nice touch.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you notice, the listener will have noticed by now, if he hasn't gotten bored of my rambling, that I am a very dedicated Barrichello fan. And KB Racing downsized to 2 cars, and one of the cars, outside of the one obviously driven by Kanaan, went to Simona Di Silvestro, and Barrichello simply didn't have the financial means to continue in IndyCar. So he went to his home country, worked on television there, and also competed in the local stock car series. And here's the thing: 2014 was well, for lack of I won't say the last interesting year of Barrichello, because that's not true, but it was a very meaningful one, so to speak. He won the Brazilian stock car series in 2014. And later that year, according to former team principal Rivero, there were discussions, or a contract signed even, that Barrichello would join Caterham for the final 3 races of the season, replacing Kamui Kobayashi. And this is the point where I openly admit there goes the fan in me completely goes off the rails. Like, objectively, it would have been terrible. Like, straight up terrible. He would have been out of the sport for 3 years, would have never driven a turbo in Formula 1, and would have joined a team that was so far on the verge of death that, in fact, the drive didn't happen simply because the team went into administration first, so... But it's still I won't completely rule out that he could have perhaps shown one final bit of magic. Not until I am... Like, again, rationally I know that won't have happened, but...
Yeah, Barrichello, one thing you haven't mentioned is that Barrichello really wanted to get back into Formula 1. He was the last person, basically, to admit that he'd been fired when it was in the end of 2011. There was an interview of him in the BBC at the Brazilian Grand Prix. They interviewed him and he was just like, no, I'm not. Everyone's like, why are you all treating it like it's my last race? And this is like, it's kind of your last race, isn't it? He's like, no, it's not my last race. And it was his last race. he seemed to be totally oblivious to the fact that he was on the way out, but he was very determined to come back, and the Caterham re-entry wasn't the only time. I can't remember off the top of my head the other ones, but there were other times in which he was trying to return to Formula One in another capacity.
Yeah, I mean, he was even looking for sponsorship. It was not like he was completely without any. It was just that Senna had more. I think those numbers, again, don't fact check them too precisely, but I think Barrichello had somewhere in the range of 10 million from Brazilian sponsors, and well, Senna simply had 25. So it was not for lack of a trying that he lost the seat at Williams. He would have paid for it, but he just simply couldn't pay as much as Senna, and Williams, short-sighted team that it was, to tie back to the Andretti discussion from very earlier, simply went with the 15 million, and of course, as we know in hindsight, probably forfeiting quite a healthy bit of prize money in the process. Yeah, anyway, since that day, as I said, Barrichello has been competing in the Brazilian Stock Car Series and commentating for, what's the Brazilian channel called again? Globo TV? I think it's about Globo TV. Yeah. And his drive with in the Stock Car Series is with a team called Full Time Sport, who have become associated with Toyota since 2020. And as part of that association, he went to the neighboring Argentinian TC2000 series, where he, at age 48, managed to achieve one minor piece of motorsport history. As the Argentinian TC2000 series has existed for, at that time, 41 years. And never to that point had a foreign driver won any race without an Argentinian. To explain that, the TC2000 series had one endurance race per year where two drivers teamed up, and there occasionally foreign drivers took part alongside Argentinian drivers, and 3 of them won. But Barrichello was the first to win a race in that series outright at Buenos Aires. And that was a nice bit of history to add at age 48. So that's the thing. That is why, as I said earlier, my stubbornness, I won't go as fast to say delusion, but my unique viewpoint of 2009 is such a fool's crusade. I mean, the guy is a champion of Formula 3000. Is he? No, wait, sorry. A champion of British Formula 3. He's a Brazilian stock car champion. He has so many great memories in Formula 1. He has won 11 races. So, again, he has 2 children whom he dearly loves, who have begun a racing career, even though, let's be real, they aren't very good.
Nice.
Sorry, but it's the truth. I would have said he had a loving wife, but I think they divorced in 2019, 2010, 2020, whatever. So, yeah, he has a great life. It's still ongoing, thank God. And he had a great career, which in motorsport as a whole isn't over yet. So, yeah, it is what it is. But, yeah.
Do you know something? Do you know a random fact, Lennart, which you probably didn't even know about? Yesterday, the day before we're recording this podcast, Rubens Barrichello turned 50. It was his birthday yesterday.
That's nice. Happy birthday to you, Rubens. If you're
Happy
listening.
birthday, Rubens Barrichello. On the other side of the garage, Jenson Button, after 2009, simply faded into obscurity. And that concludes our podcast. Thank you for joining us here at GP Rejects.
And I thought I was hard to answer.
Thank you for joining us here at GP Rejects at the teammate collision. There were no teammate collisions actually between Button and Barrichello. That should be noted.
Not once.
But yeah, we hope you enjoyed our super long random sideways segment talking about hopefully getting a lot off of our chest regarding the teammateship between Button and Barrichello. And yeah, let us know if you've got any other lesser talked about rivalries, teammate situations, or just anything you want us to talk about. we can suggest it for a future podcast. Yeah, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This will be up as soon as I can get it. Let us know what you think in the comments, and let us know what you think about our content and also about the channel itself. We are planning to do some big updates to the GP Rejects website, so let us know if you have any ideas for that, because we are listening to our community and we are more than happy to hear what you have to say and what your suggestions are. So on behalf of Lennart and myself, thank you very much for listening.
Anyway, as Jeremy so kindly said, smash that like button. I always wanted to say that. Subscribe if you want to, and obviously our website gprejects.com hasn't gone anywhere. And always remember, where teammates are close, teammates collide.
To be very honest with you, I wish I can get on the plane and go back home right now. I don't want to talk to anybody in the team because I don't want to understand. There will be a lot of blah, 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 and I don't want to hear that.
Are you saying the team are definitely favouring Jenson?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there was a good show how to lose a race today. I'm not saying that they favour anyone.